Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of October. So I read 16 books, although 7 of those I think were graphic novels and 6 were audiobooks, but there were also some really great books. I think my average rating for October was the highest that it's been for the whole year, so I'm excited to tell you about these books. As usual, I am going to do this book battle style, which means I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. So our first battle is going to be between a couple of sci-fi series that I finished off. So we have the Innkeeper Chronicles books 3 to 5 by Ilona Andrews up against the Murderbot Diaries 5 and 7 by Martha Wells. So firstly, the Innkeeper Chronicles. This is actually a sci-fi fantasy in a world where all the supernatural creatures are actually aliens, but it happens that Earth is kind of this important transportation hub in the universe, and aliens often like to pass through, and when they do, there's kind of this treaty in place that means they have to stay at these inns, and it's the innkeeper's jobs to kind of keep the aliens safe but also keep them a secret from the rest of humanity. So primarily the series follows this innkeeper called Dina as she deals with these different alien guests at the same time as kind of trying to build up a new inn's reputation and find out what happened to her innkeeper parents who went missing. But actually, book 4, which we're starting with here, did I say book 3 just moments ago? I think I did. That's not true. Book 4 is the one I started with this month, and this is actually a story following Dina's sister. So in book 3, Dina got a message from her sister saying, hey, I need help, come and save me. And in book 4, we're kind of getting that story, but from the sister's perspective, or at least the beginning is that story from the sister's perspective, and then it continues on to where her sister goes. I guess it's a little bit spoilers, but I can probably say her sister does have like an association with vampires. Vampires in this case, of course, being aliens. So for most of this book, she's kind of in this vampire culture trying to prove that even though she's human, she can kind of fit in and be as tough as the rest of the vampires. But it's such an interesting version of vampire culture, and I think this is something Ilona Andrews is really great at, is taking like classic supernatural type things and putting an interesting twist on them. The books are very clever and very funny. Often I don't like humor in books, but the way that Ilona Andrews does humor, I always enjoy. And there's just something about the momentum of this book that means for me, I just don't want to stop reading them. There's always something happening, and I don't know if that's partially because these books were initially written in serialized form, so they were released in little parts, which means the authors were kind of pushed towards that constant momentum. But I still think that's often true of their other books, the Kate Daniels series and the Hidden Legacy series. They kind of also have a similar momentum. Anyway, these books are a lot of fun. I really liked book 4, even though it was kind of a step away from the main series following Dina. Books 5 and 6 do come back to Dina, although book 5 is kind of like a bit of a Christmas special. Although it's not Christmas, it's a special innkeeper holiday where they have to accept any guest into the inn, and Dina ends up kind of with her hands full as a result of that. And then book 5 was kind of the strangest one. Even though I enjoyed it, if I had heard the synopsis before I picked it up, I would not have expected to like it. So book 5 is where Dina basically ends up hosting this intergalactic bachelor show. So for political reasons, this big intergalactic leader has to marry someone, and it's all being televised, the whole selection process, but it's also really politically important. So it's very silly with the whole bachelor side of things, but also has quite a lot of like political ramifications, which I just loved the way that they kind of fit those two things together. I did actually think that the 6th book was going to be the last book in the series. It turns out it's not, so I didn't get the ending that I was hoping for, but I am still very excited about getting more books in the series. Anyway, I think we'll do like a little sub-battle here where I will pick the best book of this series to go forward and represent the rest of the series in the battle. And I'm definitely going to pick Sweep of the Blade, even though it was a sidestep. I really enjoyed it. I don't often like vampire books, but the twist on kind of the context of the vampire culture and just how this human would fit into it, I really enjoyed it. Then we have Murderbot. So I read books 5 and 7, which maybe seems weird, but I had read book 6 previously. I was given advice to read it in that order, and then I looked it up and saw quite a few people supporting the idea that you should read book 6 before book 5, because book 6 is kind of quite a standalone mystery type thing, and then book 7 continues on immediately after book 5. So if you read book 6 in between 5 and 7, you're going to be really confused about why Murderbot is doing something completely different than what they were at the end of book 5, and then be confused why they end up back at the beginning of book 5 in book 7 when in book 6 they were doing something completely different. So anyway, the summary is read this series 6, 5, 7. So if you haven't heard about this series, it follows Murderbot, who is the security bot who has hacked their governor module so that they can do whatever they want, but what they really want to do is just watch TV. Unfortunately, they also have to do their job, which is saving humans after humans make really stupid decisions. Both of the books that I read in October kind of follow the idea that we go to this new place, we're exploring, everything turns to shit, and so Murderbot has to kind of try and save the day. I do think sometimes with these books, the action and the plot are a little bit convoluted, muddy. I get a little bit bored and stop paying attention, which is fine because actually sometimes Murderbot does the same. And I think weirdly what's so great about these books is how relatable Murderbot is, even though so much of these books is about the difference between humans and bots, especially in terms of how they handle their emotions. So it's kind of like, wow, they're so different, but also how relatable. And I just really enjoy that like non-human perspective of human things like emotions. And book 5 especially had some really emotional parts. Book 7, I think the plot wasn't as strong and there wasn't as much emotional content either. So I definitely preferred book 5 to book 7. So we'll put book 5 into the battle. So then, if I'm taking Sweep of the Blade and battling it against Network Effect, it's hard because I love both of these and had a really great time with both of these. But I do think I had a lot more fun and like I just couldn't put down Sweep of the Blade. So I think we're going to go with Sweep of the Blade to put forward to the next round. Okay, I was going to say that the next battle is book series, which I have completed, but I've just realized that's not true. But anyway, next battle is going to be between Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson and Against the Darkness by Kendare Blake. I guess in my head, I've decided that Rhythm of War is the end of the series. I think mainly because I've been doing a whole big, I can't place this somewhere where it's not shiny. In my head, let's just put a picture here, it'll be easier than holding this behemoth anyway. What am I trying to say? I've been doing a big like Cosmere reread that's taken me like 2 years, mainly because when I picked up Rhythm of War when it first came out, I realized I didn't feel at all ready to go into it, and I'm really glad that I did, because doing that big Cosmere reread made me go into Rhythm of War really prepared, and I picked up on a lot of things that I don't think I would have understood otherwise. And so for me, reading Rhythm of War feels like coming to the end of a big 2-year project, even though really it's Wind and Truth that is the actual end, although even that's not the end because there will be more books in the Stormlight Archives and more books in the Cosmere. So does it ever end? Probably not. But anyway, Rhythm of War. I really enjoyed it. I will say sometimes it was kind of a weird mix between like really mundane everyday things and big epic fantasy things. And I do think like the mental health, mental illness representation is done really well. Sometimes it just seemed weird to be worrying about those things when it's kind of an end of the world type situation. There's also other mundane things like party preparations and just like political admin that just sometimes felt like it dragged a little bit. Or even sometimes it didn't drag, it was still interesting, but it was just such a weird contrast with like this big end of the world type situation. I'm not even going to try and give a synopsis of the Stormlight Archives, of which Rhythm of War is the 4th book. I'm not going to because it's too complicated and too hard. And it's such a popular series, you probably know already anyway. But Rhythm of War, I really liked it. The ending especially, even though I felt like some of the earlier part of the book was just setting things up for that ending. The ending, the payoff at the ending was totally worth it. Some things totally shocked me. I'm now so excited about Wind of Truth, and I'm kind of so glad that it came together with me reading Rhythm of War just before Wind of Truth came out, because I do think Wind of Truth is going to be really exciting. So fingers crossed for that, I guess. Then we also have Against the Darkness by Kendare Blake. So this is the third and final book in the Next Generation series, I think it's called. So this is like a Buffy spin-off. We're following the daughter of Willow, who is a witch, and then ends up also becoming a slayer unexpectedly. And she's not really very good at the job initially, but by the end of the series, she kind of built her confidence, built a group of friends around her that support her, and is able to fight off the big bad. I don't feel like that's a spoiler because that's how Buffy stories work. What I will say is I am not the target market for this series. It's definitely targeted at more like a teenage age group, and as you can tell, I am not a teenager anymore. I have not been for a long time. And there was definitely a lot of teenage angst in here that I got very bored with. I also just think the first half of this book, not much really happened. And even when it got going in the end, like it wasn't mind-blowing, but maybe if I had read it when I was younger, I would have thought so. I do think that Kendare Blake did a really great job of like capturing the tone and the humor of the original Buffy shows, and there's lots of callbacks to the original shows as well. So it's a lot of fun. I felt a lot of nostalgia reading it, but was it my favorite? Probably not. I'll probably just forget all about it probably very soon. But anyway, if I'm putting these two books up against each other, I think it's pretty obvious. For me, I'm definitely going to pick Rhythm of War. Okay, then let's do a brown book battle because both of the covers for these books are brownie. So we have The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence up against The Black God's Drums by P. Djèlí Clark. So I actually have this one here from the library, although is it going to do that shiny thing again? Probably. I'm trying to make things easier for editing me, but it's not really working out. Anyway, put a picture here editing me. This is a strange one. We're following this young girl named Lemire. She lives out in the desert known as the Dust, and she's always dreamed of going to the city and, you know, has big dreams of learning about the world. She does end up going to the city, but through somewhat unexpected events. And when she gets there, she gets to explore this library. I almost said magical library, and it kind of is magic, but it's also kind of more technology. Well, is it technology? Is it magic? Sometimes it's a little bit unclear. But in the city, there is this library full of knowledge, and as well, we get a different perspective of this boy or this 20-year-old guy, and him and his family or these other young people are trapped in this part of the library with him, and eventually of course we get these two perspectives interacting. But the best thing about this book was really just learning about the library, like the whole concept of it, and the way that you learn about it and kind of unravel the mysteries is really great. Although sometimes I feel like we could have done with a little bit more explanation of how it worked, and contrastly we got a lot of description and explanation of things that didn't really seem that important. Like the characters spend a lot of time doing things that I didn't really care about. It didn't really seem that important. I didn't really understand why they were doing it. It didn't seem like they had much motivation. And then it would just be they would stumble in accidentally to something that was actually happening. So I just kind of ended up a little bit frustrated with the pacing and that we spent so much time on things that didn't matter and not enough time on things that did matter. But overall, I really love the concept of this book, and I also really love some of the themes it was exploring, kind of around the destruction of civilization and like the circularity of time. So it wasn't everything that I wanted this book to be, especially because I've seen it so hyped, but it still was very interesting, and I'm definitely keen to get into the next book in the series soon. Then as well we have The Black God's Drums. So this one is very short. Like, let me get the physical book. Look how short it is. Tiny. And that was my biggest problem with this. So this is about a young orphan girl, and she comes across some information and decides to sell it to this sky captain. This is kind of in an alternate history at the end of slavery or in the middle of the American Civil War, and it's set in like a steampunky New Orleans. Although there's very little world building, so you never fully understand about what's going on in the world, which was frustrating for me. Like, I really think this could have been a really great setup to a bigger story, and then I would have been okay with not getting the world building because it would have been coming, but it's not coming. There is no more to the story. I guess I didn't finish giving the synopsis. Basically, this young girl has a connection to like these African gods that are kind of like coming back into the world or coming into America to try and support their people. And that kind of leads this young orphan girl and the sky captain to go on a big heroic adventure. I said big adventure. No, it's a small adventure because there was no space in the book for anything more. So as I said, this was a great setup to something more, but since it wasn't anything more, I ended up somewhat disappointed. So if I'm putting these two books, why am I holding it upside down? If I'm putting these two books up against each other, because this was so short, and probably only because of that, well, I did love the library in this. So we're going to pick The Book That Wouldn't Burn as the winner of the battle. And then I think I've just got graphic novels left to talk about. So we'll do two battles. Firstly, we have Twig by Skottie Young and Kyle Strahm up against Descender by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. So Twig, I actually just read this last night, and it is adorable. We're following this little monster type creature, and he is a placeling, or his dad was the placeling. I've forgotten the exact names here. His dad is supposed to be going on this quest, but his dad has died, didn't pick an apprentice, and so Twig has to go on this quest. He starts off very badly by sleeping in, and he has this weird little creature, some kind of slimy type creature or stretchy type creature that goes along with him. That's his best friend. Anyway, he goes on this quest and basically has to find this rock and find a way of repowering it in order to place it where it needs to be. And at the end, it has a really great message, but also I just really loved the journey, because throughout this adventure, Twig goes to all these different lands, and the art was just amazing and beautiful and creative, and almost every page I wanted to screenshot it because I was reading this digitally. In fact, I did screenshot a lot of pages because the art was just amazing. And I definitely recommend picking this up. I would compare it to Lightfall. The art is different, but probably still similarly beautiful. But also the good thing about Twig is it's all wrapped up within one volume, so you don't have to wait for more books like you do with Lightfall. Maybe the story isn't as complex, but it's still a really good time. So then we're battling that against Ascender, which is a reread for me. Now, I normally don't let rereads win the book battles. We probably won't put this forward, but Ascender is like a spin-off from the original Descender series that Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen did, in which these giant robots show up and just like kill off a bunch of humans. And then in retaliation, the humans start killing the robots. And of course, that kind of escalates into very interesting things. In Ascender, we're kind of following on from the aftermath of that series, but also there is now this new magical element being introduced, and I really liked kind of that combination of magic and technology. And of course, we get a lot of our well-loved characters from the original Descender series. And even though I had read this before, there were a lot of things that I had forgotten, or did I just not understand them the first time? I'm not sure, but I really enjoyed rereading this. And even though I would say I don't think the Ascender series is as good as the Descender series, I think if you love Descender, it's still definitely worth continuing on with Ascender just for a little bit more closure, because the ending is much more satisfying than the ending of Descender. So I love both these series, and I'm really glad that I have the rule that rereads can't win, because otherwise this would be a hard decision to make. But since Ascender can't win anyway, we'll pick Twig as the winner of the battle. Then lastly, we have a little Babysitters Club battle. So I've read Kristy and the Walking Disaster, and also Karen's Grandmothers. So these are both like Babysitters Club graphic novel adaptations. Kristy and the Walking Disaster is one of the books from the original Babysitters Club books. The Babysitters Club books were books I loved when I was a kid, basically following this group of babysitters as they look after different kids and have different life lessons. In Kristy and the Walking Disaster, Kristy starts this baseball team for like very young players or very young kids that can't get into Little League, or like ones that can't get into Little League for other reasons, and she basically just coaches them, and then they play a game against this other team. One thing I will say is, so the title of this book is Kristy and the Walking Disaster, the Walking Disaster being this one particular kid that they babysit that always like has accidents all the time, and a big part of the original book is about him and kind of his experience in the team and kind of the lessons he learns from it. And I didn't feel like there was enough Walking Disaster in this graphic novel adaptation. And I often find this with the graphic novel adaptations, that because there's just not as much space for story, they end up missing a lot of the complexity of the original stories, even though I see complexity. These are like children's books that are only a couple of 100 pages long. They're not that complex to begin with, but the graphic novel adaptations kind of have to slim it down even more. And I think that's why after I read the graphic novel adaptations, I always kind of want to go back and read the original, even though I definitely do not have time for that. I would love to do a Babysitters Club read through at some point, but that's a future project for future me who has a lot more time. I don't know that future me is actually going to have a lot more time, but I always like to imagine that she will. Then as well, there was a spin-off series from the original Babysitters Club books following the little sister of one of the babysitters, so actually Kristy from the Walking Disaster book I just talked about. So her younger sister Karen is this young girl who's a little bit over the top, very imaginative, and in this one, she gets involved in this program where they're going to go after school to visit these old people in this retirement village who don't have any family to visit them. And Karen gets very excited because she already has 2 actual grandmothers as well as 2 step-grandmothers. And so now she's thinking, I could have a 5th grandmother and I will win at having grandmothers. And her best friend is actually like, why would you want that? Old people are scary. So there's a bit of a lesson there that old people maybe aren't as scary as you might think, but also that old people are still people and you might not necessarily get along with all old people. As always, kind of some good lessons. I don't think that the little sister ones always hit the lessons as well, and it's a little bit harder because they're targeted at an even younger age group, so they have to be like super simple, and I always kind of end up wanting them to be a little bit more, but still, it was fun. If I was putting these 2 books up against each other though, I would still pick Kristy and the Walking Disaster because it had better messages. And like, please don't go out and try and collect grandmothers. Okay, so now let's do a couple of semi-final battles. So firstly, we'll have Sweep of the Blade by Ilona Andrews, up against Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, up against The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. How am I making this decision? This is really hard, actually, because what I loved about all of these books was really different. And part of me wants to say that Sweep of the Blade was the book I had the least problems with. So then maybe I should pick Sweep of the Blade, but that feels wrong because even though that was a lot of fun, like it was mostly just a lot of fun and it didn't have the amazing concepts that Rhythm of War and The Book That Didn't Burn had. So I'm going to take away Sweep of the Blade, even though I really loved it and I recommend that series if you want something quite fun. It just wouldn't feel right to pick that. But then we're left with Rhythm of War and The Book That Wouldn't Burn. And the problem is that I had pacing problems with both of these. There were parts of both of these books where I was a little bit bored, but the concepts of both of them are really amazing, and like the themes of both of them really great. How do I choose? I know that I rated one of these higher than the other, but I just can't decide, was that right? You know, both of these have really beautiful covers as well, because for a moment I thought maybe I'll just pick the prettiest cover, but I can't even do that. I guess we'll just go with my rating. So I rated Rhythm of War higher. And I mean, I have the books physically here. This is Rhythm of War. This is The Book That Wouldn't Burn. They're both very big books, but Rhythm of War still wins in terms of content size. Am I really picking on content size? That's not right. But I guess even the bits of Rhythm of War where I was a little bit bored and I felt like the pacing was dragging, I still had a better time than the parts where I was kind of confused and bored in The Book That Wouldn't Burn. And I definitely feel much more attached to the characters in Rhythm of War. I found something. The character development in The Book That Wouldn't Burn, like it's good, but I didn't really feel like the characters felt fully fleshed out as much as the characters do with Rhythm of War. Now, admittedly, The Book That Wouldn't Burn is a first book and Rhythm of War is a 4th book, so is that fair? Probably not, but we have to make this decision somehow or we'll be here forever. So we're going to pick Rhythm of War as the winner of this battle that will go through to the final. Then we'll do a graphic novel semi-final, and we'll have Twig by Skottie Young and Kyle Strahm up against Kristy and the Walking Disaster by Ellen Crenshaw. This, I think, though, is a pretty obvious battle. Thank goodness we got an easier one. So I'm going to pick Twig. It was beautiful. The art is great. The art in the Babysitters Club books or graphic novel adaptations is good, but it's nothing amazing. Maybe that's just my preference for fantastical creatures and worlds, but Anyway, Twig is definitely the winner of this battle. So then, to pick the best book of the month, we have Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson up against Twig by Skottie Young and Kyle Strahm. I have said that name multiple times in this video and I still don't feel confident about it. Anyway, this feels like a ridiculous battle. We have one book which is massive and thick and chunky and another book which is just a little graphic novel volume. Is it a fair battle? Maybe not, but I honestly feel like I could go either way on this. Because like I said with the previous battle, I didn't have really any problems with Twig. And I did have some problems with Rhythm of War, so does that mean Twig was better? It doesn't really work like that, does it? But I kind of also want to pick Twig. Do I? Let me look at my rating. I rated them the same. That's not gonna save me. Okay, look, we just have to make the decision. It feels wrong to pick Twig because it was such a simple story, even though I really loved it. But admittedly, I do have to question how much, like, I only read it last night, so is it recency bias? Is that story gonna, like, really stick with me? Like, maybe I'm gonna look back on it fondly for a long time, but there's so much more about Rhythm of War that I will continue to think about. So we're gonna put Rhythm of War. Oh, we're up to the end. So Rhythm of War is the best book of the month. Is that what I expected? I don't know. Anyway, let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video. I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. Or let me know what the best book you read was in the month of October. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.